Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something that's honestly like a giant puzzle. Australia's global footprint. When you think of a country's international presence, you probably picture diplomats shaking hands or maybe troops on deployment. But the reality? It is way more complex than that. It's a super delicate, high-stakes balance that spans from kicking down doors and catching international crime syndicates to painstakingly evaluating humanitarian aid, all while navigating these really intense human rights dilemmas. We're going to look at 3 distinct real-world source documents today that perfectly capture this tension.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. First up, Strike Force Millstream. 2. The Human Rights Dilemma. 3. Assessing that risk. 4. Soft Power and Development. And finally, number 5, Australia's Global Balancing Act.
All right, Section 1, Strike Force Millstream and International Enforcement.
To really grasp the raw, hard power of Australia's reach, we've got to look at this incredible 8-year investigation led by the New South Wales Police Force. Just look at this number. $55 million. Working alongside the New South Wales Crime Commission, investigators tracked this absolutely staggering amount of laundered cash. I mean, we aren't talking about small-time crooks here. This was drug-derived wealth funding an entire criminal empire. And it just goes to show you the massive financial stakes involved when Australian authorities target transnational organized crime.
And this operation, it was relentless. Over those 8 years, the strike force intercepted more than 7 tons of drugs. To put that into perspective, that includes 2 tons of MDMA and nearly a ton of meth, leading to 28 arrests. All of this was tied directly to the criminal elements of the Lone Wolf motorcycle gang. In the climax of this whole massive undertaking, they actually extradited 2 top targets, a 36-year-old and a 38-year-old, who had set themselves up over in Dubai. They were living this insanely opulent life, seriously thinking they were completely beyond the reach of Australian justice. Well, they were wrong. They got flown straight back to Sydney, met by a tactical operations team, and taken right to the Sydney Police Center.
I really want to highlight this quote directly from the police briefing, because it perfectly sets the tone for what we're looking at today. Those days are over. You cannot just assume that you will be able to escape to another country. The New South Wales Police made it crystal clear. Criminal syndicates simply can't just hide out in places like Dubai anymore. With foreign governments backing them up, the long arm of Australian law literally spans the globe now. Moving on to Section 2, the Human Rights Dilemma and Ethical Boundaries.
So, as you just saw, Australian police go after overseas targets pretty aggressively. But here's the big question. What happens when that incredible global reach crashes headfirst into foreign legal systems that absolutely do not share Australian human rights standards? Well, that brings us to this remarkable document. This is the actual official Australian Federal Police National Guideline on Offshore Situations. It's the exact playbook that dictates these super tense interactions when Australian authorities team up with foreign agencies. It basically ensures that catching the bad guys doesn't accidentally make Australia complicit in human rights abuses. And this right here is the exact severe ethical boundary the AFP has to navigate, TCIDTP. That stands for torture or cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Now, according to the guidelines, obviously, the AFP's main job is to enforce the law and fight transnational crime. But they have an absolute, non-negotiable obligation to consider if sharing intel with a foreign authority creates a real, foreseeable risk that a suspect might face this kind of treatment. Talk about a profound dilemma, right? You've got critical intel on a dangerous cartel, but sharing it might literally lead to someone being tortured. So what do you actually do? Which brings us to Section 3, Assessing the Risk and the SIOB Process.
To handle this kind of dilemma, the AFP doesn't just, guess. They rely on the Sensitive Investigations Oversight Board, or SIOP. Now, what's really interesting about this is the specific variables they weigh. When an AFP officer wants to share offshore intel, they have to run through a super strict checklist. How serious is the crime? Does the foreign country have a track record of human rights abuses? Are they even a signatory to the UN Convention Against Torture? They actually even look at the suspect's age and personal circumstances, plus the flip side, like what are the public safety risks if they don't share the info and a dangerous criminal goes free? It is a ridiculously delicate balancing act between seeking justice and protecting fundamental human rights.
And all that assessing results in this risk matrix. Basically, the AFP categorizes the risk of sharing evidence into low, medium, or high. A low risk is usually early on in an investigation, very few confirmed facts, just feeling out some lines of inquiry. A medium risk,
That means sharing the intel will likely lead to identifying an offender in a country where, say, judicial corporal punishment is actually on the table. And then there's high risk. This involves handing over significant, damning information that's likely going to directly cause an arrest or prosecution where there's a real danger of torture. In those high-risk scenarios, the intel can only be shared under very, very strict exceptions, like if it's literally the only way to prevent a serious crime against an innocent person.
So before anyone makes a move in these sensitive situations, it triggers this multi-step bureaucratic chain of command. Officers have to immediately advise their international teams and fill out a formal TCIDP reporting request. That paperwork goes all the way up the chain, through commanders, superintendents, the whole shebang, until it reaches the SIO for a final call on whether or not to actually disclose the information. And crucially, if the person at risk of torture happens to be an Australian citizen, the AFP has to report that to the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade Head of Mission in that country as soon as humanly possible. All right, Section 4, Soft Power and Development, looking at international aid.
So we've spent a lot of time on the intense, high-stakes world of criminal enforcement. But believe it or not, that is only half the story of Australia's global footprint. Let's shift gears entirely over to soft power, diplomacy, and international development. If we want to see exactly where Australia prioritizes this non-criminal side of things, we can look straight at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade's 2023 Annual Development Evaluation Plan. This data breaks down roughly 40 expected independent evaluations for that year, and you can see the geographical focus right away. The vast majority of resources are heavily concentrated in Australia's immediate neighborhood. We're talking 19 programs in the Pacific and 15 in Southeast Asia, with a much smaller number left for global programs and South and West Asia. To really bring those numbers to life, here are some of the actual on-the-ground humanitarian projects they're running and evaluating. It covers everything from the Economic and Social Infrastructure Program in Papua New Guinea and the Vanuatu Health Program, to disaster risk management in Indonesia, and even partnering with UNRW and the Palestinian territories. I mean, this is the very essence of soft power, right? Building relationships, improving lives, and stabilizing entire regions through health and economic support. It's a completely different universe from the world of extraditions and crime syndicates.
And finally, Section 5, Australia's Global Balancing Act, weighing justice against aid. So the crucial point is, how do all these wildly different pieces fit together to form a single nation's international strategy? Well, this brilliantly illustrates the duality of the whole thing. On the left, you've got the raw execution of hard power, tracking tens of millions in dirty money, breaking up motorcycle gangs, dragging cartel bosses out of luxury penthouses in Dubai. But then, on the right, you have the incredibly delicate execution of soft power and ethics, navigating these highly classified, strict bureaucratic frameworks to make sure suspects aren't tortured, all while managing and evaluating dozens of humanitarian aid programs across the Pacific and Asia to build regional stability. Which really leaves us with this final thought. We've seen the thrilling, high-action successes of international policing, the super sobering reality of the ethical frameworks needed to govern it, and the massive scale of humanitarian aid. So how does a nation balance the aggressive pursuit of international justice with the uncompromising demand for human rights and global aid? It's a complex, daily tightrope walk on the global stage. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this helped you get a better grasp on the fascinating mechanics behind Australia's global reach. See you next time.